There's linear time, and that's important to regard. And certainly that's employed in the cyclical time. But when we're talking about seasons and the magical year, it's more about reoccurring things, or things that in particular times and places that we can respond to. Christianity, certainly, like the post-Abrahamic Marduk myths, represents and takes the place of earlier mythologies. And certainly feminism and Wicca tends to reinterpret some of these things. They did have astronomical accuracy back in the day. They're even to the point of predicting the moon cycle. So a lot of the combinations of waxing, waning, full moon, eclipse, that sort of thing, in combination with the seasonal elements, that stuff was known. It wasn't like a week off or whatever. So in neo-paganism, they don't regard the monuments that say it's the cross quarter nights are the most effective for the spirits and concourse of them, like the ones that start and end the bright quarter are, well, they're all fire festivities. In bulk, the start of the spring quarter is more along the lines of a candle, and the others more along the lines of a house or hearth fire, that sort of thing. But the others are full on bonfires, so that's different. But they're like gates. So there's the gates of fire. There's the gates of, you could say earth, really, but that's more along the lines of another program. So blood and water and that sort of stuff. So certain things are used, and what's used in the seasonal ceremonies depends on what the animals are doing. Particularly, you may want to look at your area. Like, for example, some areas of America, it gets so hot in the summer. That's when people would die. People would die during that time of year, particularly because it wasn't an area that had like some of the storms. But on the other hand, like even though you do have some of the same harvest related stuff, in the East Coast, particularly in the Southeast, it's hurricane season. So one, in a lot of areas, it means that the hottest day of year on average is going to be a little bit earlier. And it's also going to indicate that maybe washing away would be part of the mythology, just like in some parts of India and Africa, where the mythology would be a bit different. Now, this book comes with a pronunciation guide for some of the Gaelic, and you could say Gaelic is the other. Oh, I forget which one's the Irish and which one's the Scottish. Sort of. Anyways, so you have some of the names of the festivals. As I said, Samhain got its name because it was one of those ones that it was a week into November. So that combined with the lineups of all these 8 points. There are other ones that were traditionally practiced in some areas, but these 8 points are the most essential. And in the Canaanite, I guess you'd say the solstices, the green and the blue, and those were the equinoxes, and the solstices in white and black. As you notice, I color coded the year to represent some of this stuff. The Celtic year: orange, black, purple, green, yellow, white, red, blue. You have some reversals, you could say, of the themes. Just like in the brightest, you could say things are most open, although it's the shortest night. So I guess things are compacted all into one. Midsummer's night, as you would call it. So summer was the brightest time of the year. Fall was the time where it started to cool down. Spring was when it started to warm up. On average, I'm not saying there wasn't frost or something in March or whatever, but you know, that sort of stuff would go on. So the fairies and all that sort of stuff would be associated with the midsummer's night, as it would be called. And the season of love, of course, phallic stuff. So it would open up with the maypole and all that, and it would close with the sacrifice, with the woman who's had her child, and she's, you know, and then the sun takes over. So it's, and his hero story becomes dominant with the fall equinox. The spring equinox, again, it's about a male hero, but he's not the one to survive. And again, the, you know, and what they call Lent, you could say, extends to the other holidays. So it kind of goes on a bit. So Christianity took over some of these things. They changed the dates, particularly moving them a little bit earlier or something, as a way of competing, and usurping some of the stuff thereby. And one of the things that you find, you know, like ewe's milk, the February one, it was a time when, you know, maybe the young would be born, they'd start to nurse the young. But on the other side, the start of Samhain, as opposed to hardship causing you to slaughter more animals, or they would look over and see which ones they didn't think was going to make it through the winter. And, you know, you'd have the squash harvest around then. And nuts and berries, or the Lunasa one. The pear and the wheat that needs to dry out and store for winter, that sort of thing. Some areas it's the corn, and you got the pears and the apples in between, and the start of what they call fall was the time to go in and check what vegetation needs to be culled. So certainly in the garden, that's something that I'm doing. I say feminism in particular because certain things could be overstated. And one of those things that are okay, we have the sun bull, the moon bull, whatever, that's a different side, that's the Mithraic. And it's like the heroes need to do something, but they need to keep doing stuff. So we employ ourselves in these things. And in terms of Santa's helpers and the Flyagaric mushrooms and all that sort of stuff. So the people who use drugs and use them as part of these ceremonies, it varies even outside of what can be harvested in those times of year. It's most symbolic to that. In my last seasonal, you could say it was like a good side of the Bane high. Now, I'm not advocating ritual drug use. I'm not advocating recreational drug use in particular, and really not supporting, say, you know, the breaking the law stuff. That's not what my channel is about. We find that the sun forms patterns of spirals and all sorts of other stuff. The moon can be thought of as feminine, although some cultures consider the moon masculine and the sun feminine. But remember, the different stages of each are combined in the symbolism, and they could predict that very accurately. A lot of this stuff we don't know when and where it came from. It's apparent that, like, as I said, I mentioned the Marduk thing and the Mithraic thing. That's Mithraism goes back much further, actually, but go back with Tetley, really. But the most popular myths tend to be post what you could say Abrahamic. You can view the year before that. Marduk and Ishtar weren't usurper entities. They were kind of, you know, and that's what Purim is. Purim's like a February thing. Did I say there's different types of trees? So if you look at, you know, from Yule, you know, if there's extra days or something, you could say that starts at with pine. And then you have birch, and then you have rowan, then you have ash, elder, willow, hawthorn, oak, holly, hazel, vine, ivy, dwarf elder or reed, and then you have just plain old elder. And months were named after the first day, and same thing with seasons. That was a common practice. Days of the week, that's also combined. So solar, lunar, Martian, mercurial, jovial, Venusian, Saturnian, that sort of thing. We need, you know, you might want to, and you know, so we remember the past. We enact the past. But whether it's from a period that we know about or some transference between the different types of human, you know, different subspecies, different races that are extinct. The myths convey some sort of truth, you could say. Sometimes it's not always literal, but they're to bring about abilities. So holly and ivy, and then it shrinks away, and oak takes its place, and you have certain flowers that pop up even through the snow. And so the snake coming out of its hole is definitely one of those things. The male and female both have their role. So let's not pretend just the ancients, sexism and all that sort of stuff has started with, no, it didn't start with Christianity, and feminism doesn't really fix the issue. And then there's those between months, like, you know, the 4 months a year where there isn't one of these, wasn't one of these ceremonies traditionally, you know. January, April, July, October. Of course, it wasn't that those were devoid of stuff, because certainly they had, just like in parts of India, they had months named after stuff, and maybe they'd have every moon or every whatever they would have that sort of thing. So the animals, the plants, the land, our relation to our environment, that sort of stuff is conveyed. Certain heroes that got divinized, they some of it's complete happenstance, some of it entities chose them, and some of them are stuff that people kind of just brought out of themselves because that's what they thought, and that's what they were going to try for. I'm not saying you don't be satisfied with whatever opportunity that you have that you can do what needs to be done. And in Northwest Europe, knots and cross borders and that sort of thing would have different implications that they would in other areas. Although demons and knots that was a worldwide thing, but it's a different sort of thing. The lines and knots, it's not all evil or not all good. It's how you use these things. So the personification, that's about us. And what we believe as far as limits or plurality in divinity, that tells us something about us. And what we pass on and how we pass it on is sometimes less about the facts. And I always wonder, like, the whole hag thing being more associated with the darker time of year. And so is some of this because of the weakness that a person would naturally have? Or sickness or whatever? Or is this retelling some other sort of event? Now, don't think that there are I don't want people to step away from this saying there are that the spirits, you know, those male and female entities, you know, the jinn, that they're going to physically hurt us. They're going to make us do things. Now, they can convince people of beliefs that may cause them pain or whatever, but their power is as far as people believe. So there is meaning to life, people. And sometimes it's best to be active. Sometimes it's best to be passive. Sometimes, you know,